If you had just 1 minute left to live, what would you do? This question had never seemed so real until now. In that moment, it wasn't just an abstract thought or something you ponder in quiet moments. No, this was real. I was lying on the operating table, about to slip into a world where I wouldn't have a say in what happened next. And yet, here I was, consumed with the terrifying, numbing thought that this could be it, my time was up. I don't believe there's anything after death, I had told my wife just a week ago, over dinner. We'd talked about it before, about what happens when you die. She had always said she hoped there was something more, some kind of afterlife where we could be together again. I laughed it off then, mostly out of fear, but also out of sheer skepticism. It's just the end, Han, I had told her. You just go. Nothing more. No magic, no miracle. But now, as I lay on the operating table, those very words sounded hollow. I couldn't remember a time when I had ever believed in anything beyond the tangible world, the physical life. Everything was rational, scientific, provable. Until the moment I heard the words, "There's no pulse. We've lost him." Suddenly, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, a sound that had become so familiar in the sterile hospital room, stopped. It was just a single, hollow, and unbroken tone. It was the sound of finality, a sound that hit me like a jolt of cold, terrifying awareness. This was it. This was how it ended. No dramatic words, no final farewell. Just a moment of silence and a statement that seemed almost too ordinary for something as monumental as death. As I lay there, I felt myself sinking deeper into the cold metal of the operating table. My vision blurred, my body grew heavier, as though gravity itself had grown stronger in the face of my surrender. The room, once filled with the frantic energy of doctors and nurses, became distant, muffled. I felt the life drain from my limbs, my chest. The world slowed down around me, until all that remained was that unyielding beep, the last sound that would ever fill my ears. But then, just as quickly, it stopped. My heart wasn't beating anymore, but I was still conscious. I was still aware. And suddenly, I wasn't in the room anymore. I don't know how to describe it. There was no sound. No feeling of falling or floating, but there was movement. One moment, I was there, lying on that cold table, and the next, I found myself rising. I didn't know where I was going, only that I was being pulled upward, as though gravity itself had released me, sending me to some new destination. I wasn't scared. There was a peace, a calmness to it. It was like I had always known this moment was coming, even if I hadn't acknowledged it before. I was being drawn up, away from my body, away from everything I had ever known. As I rose, I saw it. The operating room beneath me, the sterile white lights, the team of doctors standing over my lifeless body, trying in vain to revive me. There I was, on the table, pale, still, a face contorted in unconscious agony. But somehow, I was detached. I wasn't attached to that body anymore. It was as if I had been freed from the burden of my physical self. I was floating, higher and higher, my consciousness expanding, becoming more attuned to the space around me. Everything felt lighter. My senses were heightened, but not in the way they were when I was alive. I wasn't bound by my human limitations anymore. And then, I saw it. The light. It wasn't like anything I had ever experienced before. It wasn't the bright, harsh light of a hospital room, or the warm glow of the sun. It was something other. A light that surrounded me, that engulfed me, that invited me in. It wasn't just a color or a physical source of illumination, it felt like the very essence of life itself. I didn't have words for it. I could feel it with every fiber of my being. A radiant presence, both comforting and overwhelmingly powerful. And that was when I heard it. A voice. But not a voice like any I had ever heard before. It wasn't spoken in words, but rather conveyed in a way I can only describe as pure understanding. It was not a voice that came from outside, but from within the very core of my being. You are at a crossroads, it said, though I didn't hear it in my ears. I felt it. You have a choice. You can stay here, in this peace, or you can return. Your time on earth is not yet over. I wanted to stay. That was the truth of it. There was a peace here, an overwhelming sense of serenity that made everything I had ever known seem trivial in comparison. The pain, the struggles, the daily grind, none of it mattered. All of it felt so distant, so irrelevant. I wanted to stay in the warmth of that light forever, to never have to face the uncertainties of life again. But then, a thought entered my mind, unbidden, unplanned. My family. I thought of my wife, the love of my life, the woman who had spent years beside me, through thick and thin. I thought of my children, my friends. The lives I had touched, the memories I had created. I knew in that moment, somehow, that if I stayed, I would leave all of them behind. They would be left in their grief, in their pain, without me. And while the thought of returning to that world of uncertainty filled me with dread, it also filled me with something else, duty. I wasn't ready to abandon them. The voice seemed to understand my hesitation. There was a softness, a compassion to it. It's your choice, it said again. But know this, the time you have left is precious. You must live it with purpose, with meaning. Do not squander it. And in that moment, I understood. I understood that life wasn't about avoiding pain or discomfort. It was about what you made of the time you had left. It was about love, connection, and purpose. With that understanding, I made my choice. I returned. But as I descended back toward the table, toward the body that was me, there was no joy, no celebration. There was only a quiet, resolute feeling. The transition wasn't like coming back from a dream, it was more like being dragged back to reality after you've experienced something too vast to ever describe. Something too beautiful to ever forget. The next thing I knew, I was awake. The sterile smells of the operating room flooded my senses. I could feel the sharp pain of my chest, the tightness in my throat. I gasped for air, trying to make sense of it all. I was alive. But I didn't feel the same. Nothing felt the same. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My eyes fluttered open, but the world around me felt distant, muted. I was aware of the pain in my chest, the tightness in my lungs, but there was also something else, something profoundly different. It was as though the very air I was breathing wasn't the same as it had been before. The sterile hospital room seemed to fade into the background as my mind tried to wrap itself around what had just happened. I was alive again, and yet, in that very moment, I had never felt more removed from the physical world. The sharp beeping of the heart monitor, the sound of the nurses and doctors rushing around, all of it seemed so irrelevant. The pain in my body, the dull ache in my head. Nothing seemed to matter as much anymore. But it was more than just the disconnection I felt from my body. It was as if my consciousness had shifted somehow. I could feel myself aware in a way I had never been before. My body was still there, still functioning, but I wasn't really there with it. It was as if I had stepped outside of myself, detached in a way I couldn't explain. I closed my eyes again, trying to focus, trying to make sense of it all. Had I really just died? The idea felt absurd, yet in my soul, I knew it had been real. I had seen the light. I had heard the voice. I wasn't just imagining things. This wasn't some hallucination or a dream. I had left my body, and somehow, I had come back. And then, as if to prove to me just how strange my new reality had become, I felt myself lifting again. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden flash of light or sense of floating through the air. It was much subtler than that. I simply found myself rising, gently, as if gravity no longer had any claim on me. The sounds around me dimmed even further, and the once bright white lights of the operating room became nothing more than a blur, an indistinct presence in the periphery of my awareness. I looked down and saw my own body on the operating table, the same pale, lifeless form I had seen before. But now, it felt like it belonged to someone else. A shell. An empty vessel. I wasn't bound to that body anymore. I was free. I had been lifted beyond the world I knew, beyond the confines of my physical existence. As I rose, I found myself in a space unlike any I had ever known. I could see it now, a vast expanse stretching before me, a space that felt more like a realm than a place. It was not a room, not a structure, but something, open. It was infinite, boundless. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, but it felt as though everything was alive. The very air, if you could call it air, was thick with energy, with something I couldn't explain, something powerful and yet gentle at the same time. There was no weight to anything. No restrictions. No pain. I could hear whispers, soft, melodic sounds, though there were no words. It was as if everything around me was speaking, not with voices, but with a language that bypassed the need for sound. It was communication on a level beyond human understanding. I didn't need to listen with my ears. I understood it all. And then, the light. It wasn't bright like the sun, and it wasn't blinding. It was soft, a gentle glow that permeated everything. It came from every direction, every angle, wrapping around me like a warm embrace. It was a kind of light that I didn't even need to look for. It was everything. It was life itself. It was then that I noticed something else. A presence. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't like any individual I had ever met. It wasn't a person or an entity with form or shape. But it was something vast, something more powerful than I could ever hope to understand, yet at the same time, infinitely compassionate and welcoming. This presence, this being, radiated an energy so pure that it felt like love itself. It was as if the very core of my soul was being caressed by something beyond words. It was a feeling of acceptance, of peace, as though nothing I had ever done or thought in my life mattered, except for the fact that I existed, and that was enough. I couldn't help but be drawn to it. I was pulled toward it, not by force, but by something else. A magnetic, irresistible pull that called to me like a lost child seeking its mother. And then, there was a voice. Not a voice in the traditional sense. It wasn't something I heard with my ears. It was more like a thought, a knowing, that resonated deep within me. You have come to a place of truth. The words weren't spoken aloud, but they filled my entire being. The understanding, the message, it was instant. It was clear. And with it came a profound sense of home, as though this place, this light, was where I had always belonged, even if I hadn't realized it before. Do you understand, now? The voice asked. I did not respond in words, but I felt an overwhelming certainty in my heart. The fear, the doubt, the confusion that had clouded my existence before, it all melted away in an instant. In that moment, everything became clear. Life was not the end. It was merely a passage. I understood, then, that death was not the final chapter. It wasn't something to fear. It was a transition, a moment of shedding what no longer served, so that something more pure, more real, could emerge. And as that understanding settled into me, a feeling of peace washed over me. It wasn't like anything I had ever known. It was a peace so profound that it felt like the entire universe was embracing me, wrapping me in an endless ocean of understanding. And then, just as quickly as I had arrived, I felt the pull again, the pull to return. I wasn't sure what it meant or why, but I knew that the time was not yet right for me to stay. Your journey is not complete. You must return. It wasn't a command, but a gentle invitation. An understanding. Reluctantly, I began to feel myself being drawn back to the body that I had left behind, back to the world I had known. I felt myself descending, like a leaf falling from a tree, drifting back into the physical world. And as I moved through the familiar tunnel of space and time, I heard one final whisper in my mind. Remember. The next thing I remember, I was gasping for air. My chest heaved as I struggled to fill my lungs with the oxygen that had been so fleeting just moments before. I could feel the sharp, stinging sensation of the tube that had been placed down my throat, a reminder that I had been on the brink of death. But that was the least of my concerns. I was alive again, yes, but something had changed. I felt different. Not in a physical sense, though my body was undoubtedly sore from the trauma of the surgery and the ordeal. It wasn't the kind of change you could measure with temperature or pulse. It was a deeper, more profound shift. Something had shifted within me. I opened my eyes and saw the bright lights of the hospital room. The sterile walls. The faint hum of machines. The beeping of the heart monitor, now steady again. Everything seemed so ordinary, yet nothing was the same. I was looking at the world through a new lens, a lens that was more attuned to the unseen, the unknown, the invisible. The doctors and nurses were still busy around me, but they might as well have been on a different plane of existence. The sounds were distant, muffled as though I were hearing them underwater. I could see them moving, speaking, doing their jobs, but I wasn't with them anymore. I was somewhere else, and no one could know what I had experienced. I had been on the other side. I had been in that vast expanse of light, bathed in peace and love that I couldn't even begin to explain. And now I was back, thrust into a body that felt foreign to me. I closed my eyes again, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was flooded with images from the other side, flashes of that light, the warmth, the presence that had communicated with me. I could still feel the echoes of those emotions, the profound sense of connection that I had experienced. But it was fading. Slowly. It was as though the more I focused on it, the more it slipped through my fingers, like trying to hold on to water with an open hand. But I knew one thing for certain, I had been shown something. Something more than just the afterlife. Something greater than anything I had ever understood. I wasn't sure how to explain it. How could I? I had just been to the edge of existence, and now, I was back in this small, finite world. Back to a world full of suffering, pain, confusion, and loss. And yet, it was also full of love. It was as if the universe had opened its doors to me, allowing me to see the vastness of reality, the interconnectedness of everything. And now, I was standing at the threshold, not knowing what to do with that knowledge. For the next few days, I remained in the hospital, recovering physically from the surgery. But emotionally and spiritually, I was in turmoil. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus. My thoughts kept returning to that place. That light. That overwhelming sense of peace and love that I had felt, and the words I had heard. You have a choice. You can stay, or you can return. But what did it mean? And why had I come back? Was it because I still had something to do here? Or had I been sent back for some other purpose, some deeper understanding? One night, when the hospital was quiet and I was alone in my room, I finally allowed myself to reflect more deeply. It was almost as though I had been chosen to return. The voice, the presence, had spoken with such clarity, such calmness, as though it knew exactly what was best for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I needed to learn, something I had to understand. And then, it came to me. A thought, a realization so clear that it hit me like a sudden wave. Life isn't about avoiding pain. That was the answer. It wasn't about avoiding suffering, or pretending it didn't exist. Life wasn't about controlling every outcome, every moment. It was about embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the joy, the sorrow, the highs, the lows. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Life, in its entirety, was a gift. The pain, the loss, the heartache, it was all part of it. And it had a purpose. We couldn't experience the beauty of life without the contrast of its struggles. The light, the peace I had felt, it wasn't the absence of everything else. It wasn't an escape from life. No, it was a reminder that there was something beyond this world, something eternal. And it wasn't about running from the inevitable challenges of existence. It was about recognizing that everything had meaning, everything had purpose. I felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the life I had, for the people I loved, for the chance to live again. I hadn't been shown this truth just to go on living my life the same way. No, this was an invitation to change, to live with intention, with meaning, with love. But I also knew it wouldn't be easy. How could I go back to a world where most people didn't see what I had seen? How could I explain the peace, the love, the understanding that I had felt? No one would believe me. But that didn't matter. What mattered was what I had learned. And that knowledge would guide me from that moment forward. I could no longer live my life as I had before, rushing through it, taking it all for granted. The truth had been revealed to me, and now it was my responsibility to live according to that truth. I didn't know exactly how it would look, or what challenges I would face. But one thing was clear, my life had meaning. And I had to make the most of it. The days that followed felt like a blur. I wasn't sure if I was still in the hospital or if I had somehow stepped into a different reality. My mind was heavy with the experience I had lived through, and I found it difficult to return to a normal state of being. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. The man who had walked into that operating room, the one full of cynicism, doubt, and fear, was no longer the same. I could feel it deep inside me. A transformation had occurred, something that no amount of time or physical healing could erase. The person I had been before the surgery was gone. In his place was someone who had seen beyond the veil, someone who understood, on a level that words couldn't express, that life and death were intertwined, and that there was so much more than what we could touch and see with our earthly senses. But even as I tried to come to terms with this new understanding, there was an inner conflict I couldn't ignore. The world I had returned to, the world I had left behind when I crossed over to the light, was so small. So limited. The people around me, my family, friends, colleagues, didn't seem to see the same things I did. They couldn't feel the vastness of what I had experienced. To them, it was business as usual. They had no idea that I had crossed the threshold of death and returned with knowledge of something they could never comprehend. My wife, Rachel, was the first person I tried to talk to. I had always been open with her about everything, but this was different. This was something she couldn't possibly understand. It was a quiet evening when I finally told her. We were sitting at the kitchen table, a pot of tea between us. The soft hum of the house surrounded us, the evening light slipping through the windows. I could see her face, her brow furrowed in concern as she watched me, her gaze searching, knowing that something was off. I hadn't been myself since I woke up in the hospital. I was distant, quiet, too quiet. "Joe, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" she asked gently, her voice filled with that familiar tenderness. I took a deep breath. I wasn't sure how to start. How do you tell someone you love that you've crossed into another realm, seen the afterlife, and come back? That you've been shown the truth of existence, and now, you're struggling to make sense of it all? I don't know how to say this, Rachel, I began slowly, choosing my words carefully. But something happened. Something that changed everything for me. Her expression softened, and she reached across the table to take my hand. "You're scaring me, Joe." "What happened?" I could see the worry in her eyes, and part of me wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine, that nothing had really changed. But that wasn't true. I couldn't lie about it, not to her. I died," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They said I was gone. That I didn't have a pulse. That I wasn't coming back." Her eyes widened, and she squeezed my hand, but I could see the disbelief flickering in her gaze. "Joe, stop. You're scaring me." "What do you mean, you died?" "I mean it, Rachel. I was gone. My heart stopped. My body stopped. But I wasn't gone. I woke up. But I wasn't the same. I went somewhere. Somewhere I can't explain. She pulled her hand away from mine and sat back, her gaze becoming distant. Joe, what are you saying? Are you saying you saw something, after you died? I did, I answered, my voice growing firmer, though I could hear the doubt creeping in. I saw the light. I was pulled toward it. And I felt peace, more peace than I've ever known. I heard a voice. I was shown something. A truth. And now, I can't shake it. I can't shake what I know. Rachel shook her head slowly, as if trying to make sense of what I had just told her. I don't understand. This isn't possible. You're telling me you actually went to the other side? That you, she stopped herself, struggling to put the words together. Joe, you're talking like you've had some kind of hallucination. You're talking about things that don't make sense. I know it sounds crazy, I said softly, feeling the weight of her disbelief. I wouldn't believe it if it happened to anyone else. But I felt it, Rachel. I was there. And now I'm here, and I don't know how to make sense of it. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern, fear, and love. Joe, I want to believe you. I do. But this is so far out there. Are you sure you're not just imagining things? Maybe the drugs, the stress from the surgery, maybe they're messing with your mind. The skepticism in her voice hurt, but I understood it. How could she believe me? How could anyone? I barely believed it myself. I don't know, Rachel. All I know is that I came back. And now I'm not the same. I don't see the world the way I used to. I don't see life the same way anymore. It's bigger. It's more than I ever understood. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The silence between us felt thick, heavy, and I could sense that Rachel was trying to process everything I had told her, but she couldn't. Not yet. And I didn't expect her to. Not yet. But then, she took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet resolve. I don't know if I understand, Joe. But I'll try. I don't want to lose you. I just want you to be you again. And for the first time since I woke up from surgery, I realized that this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my experience or the change I had gone through. It was about us. It was about how I would bridge this gap, how I would find a way to live this new truth without losing the people I loved. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for certain, my journey wasn't over. I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at understanding. And I would have to find a way to make that understanding part of my world. In the days that followed, I spent most of my time reflecting on what I had seen, on what I had been shown. The experience, though difficult to articulate, was a constant undercurrent running through my thoughts. I couldn't escape it, nor did I want to. It was as if the truth I had glimpsed on the other side had taken root in me, and now it was growing, pushing me towards something more than I had ever been before. The hardest part, though, was trying to find a way to live with that truth in this world. It was a struggle, and it was something no one seemed to understand. Rachel, though supportive, was still processing everything. She couldn't fully grasp what I had gone through, and that distance was palpable. I could see the concern in her eyes every time she looked at me, but there was also confusion. A reluctance to accept what I had experienced. How could I blame her? How could I blame anyone? If I hadn't gone through it myself, I would have doubted me too. I found myself waking up every morning with a sense of purpose, yet no clear understanding of what to do with it. The world around me felt different. The colors seemed brighter, the sounds clearer, but the people around me, most of them, at least, were still living in the same fog I had once inhabited. The lessons I had learned were profound, but they were also hard to grasp in such a noisy, chaotic world. And every time I tried to explain them, to share the peace and clarity I had felt, I was met with skepticism or, worse, disbelief. But that didn't stop me from trying. One morning, after another sleepless night, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my mind, to find some peace in the midst of this new reality I was navigating. I put on my jacket, stepped outside, and made my way to the park just down the street. The air was crisp, the sky overcast, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. But it didn't matter. I was in the world, and yet, I wasn't quite part of it. It was as though I had one foot in the physical world and one foot in something beyond. As I walked, my mind wandered back to the experience I had had. The light. The presence. The overwhelming sense of peace and love. And then, there was the voice. The voice that had told me that life wasn't about avoiding pain. I had been shown that death wasn't the end. That life was a journey, not a destination. But it wasn't just about physical survival. It was about understanding. Understanding our connection to everything, people, nature, the universe. Everything was part of something larger than ourselves. As I walked along the path, I noticed a group of elderly women sitting on a bench, chatting softly. They looked up as I passed, and one of them, a woman with silvery hair and a kind face, smiled at me. "Lovely day, isn't it?" she said, her voice warm and welcoming. I smiled back. "It is. It's beautiful." And just like that, an unexpected impulse surged within me, a desire to connect. Not just with these women, but with anyone who might need to hear what I had learned. I stopped and turned toward the bench. "Excuse me," I said, my voice hesitant but clear. "I don't mean to intrude, but I feel like I need to share something. I've recently gone through something, and it's changed the way I see the world. It's hard to explain, but I've learned that life, our lives, they're not just about what we can touch or see. There's so much more. And it's not something we should fear, even death." The women exchanged glances, but none of them seemed alarmed. In fact, the older woman with the silver hair leaned forward, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "What do you mean, dear?" she asked gently. I took a deep breath. I had no idea where this conversation was going, but something inside of me told me it was important. I died, you know. For a moment. They said I didn't have a pulse. But I came back. And I was shown something. Something that I can't describe fully. But I can tell you this, there's more to life than we understand. And death isn't the end. It's just a part of the cycle. The woman's eyes softened, and she nodded. "I understand," she said quietly. "You're not the first person to come to that conclusion. I've heard many speak of the same thing." I was stunned. "You have?" "Yes," she said. "There's more to life than what we can see and touch. And sometimes, when people experience death, they're given a glimpse of that other side. It's a gift, though it doesn't always feel like one at the time." I felt a weight lift off my chest. Here, in front of me, was someone who understood, someone who had heard the same truths, who had seen the same things. It was as if, in that moment, I wasn't alone anymore. "There's something beautiful waiting for us," the woman continued. "But we're not meant to rush toward it. We're meant to live fully, to embrace every moment, every pain and joy, because it all matters. It all leads to something greater." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was speaking the same language that I had experienced on the other side. She was giving voice to the wisdom that had been imparted to me, the truth I had felt so deeply. "I've spent my life trying to understand," she said with a gentle smile, "and I've learned that there's no one right way to live. But the key is in how we love, how we treat others, and how we embrace the fleeting moments we have." I couldn't help but feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I had come here, unsure of what I was even looking for, but now, I knew. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick. Thank you for sharing that. She reached out and patted my hand. No need to thank me, dear. We all need to share our truths. It helps us remember. I stood there for a moment longer, absorbing her words, feeling the weight of them settle deep in my heart. As I turned to leave, I realized something. The truth wasn't just something I had seen in the light. It was something that lived in every person, in every interaction, in every moment of kindness and love. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the peace and certainty that the other side had given me, I knew now that I had to carry that truth into the world. It wasn't just about me. It was about everyone. And in sharing what I knew, I was helping to bridge the gap between this world and the next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days turned into weeks, and I felt the world around me slowly shifting, as though the path I had once walked on had been altered, and now, I was being guided along a different route. The knowledge I had gained, the understanding that death was not an end but a transition, did not sit neatly in the life I had left behind. It was as though I was living between two worlds, still grounded in the physical, but with a constant pull toward the spiritual, the unseen. At times, the pull felt overwhelming. There were moments when I could almost hear the whispers from the other side, the quiet voice that had spoken to me during my near-death experience. It was tempting to retreat from everything, to immerse myself completely in the peace and clarity I had felt there. But I knew I couldn't. Not now. I had come back for a reason, even if I didn't fully understand it. The light, the peace, it had been a reminder that life wasn't just about surviving, it was about living with intention, with love, with a sense of purpose. And I couldn't keep that to myself. I had to live it, even when it was hard, even when the world around me seemed to be spinning in a direction I couldn't always follow. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I received a call from my old friend Ben. We had known each other for years, but our lives had drifted apart over the last few. He had his family, his job, his responsibilities, and I had mine. But Ben was one of the few people who had always been there for me, and I had a feeling this call would be different from all the others. "Joe," he said, his voice tentative, "are you okay? I've been hearing things. I mean, about your surgery, what happened to you?" He paused, unsure of how to continue. "Look, I don't know if I'm supposed to be asking about this, but what's going on? You've been acting strange." I leaned back in my chair, unsure of how to respond. Ben wasn't one to mince words, and I knew this conversation wasn't going to be easy. How could I explain the profound changes I had gone through? How could I share what I had seen and felt without sounding like I had lost touch with reality? "Ben," I started slowly, "I know it probably sounds strange. I know you might think I'm not myself. But something happened to me during that surgery. I don't know how to explain it, but I went somewhere. Somewhere I never thought I'd be." I heard Ben's breath catch on the other end of the line. "What do you mean, you went somewhere? Like, what, to the other side?" It took me a moment to gather my thoughts. This was the first time I had said the words out loud to anyone other than Rachel. My hands shook slightly as I gripped the phone tighter, trying to steady myself. "I don't know what else to call it," I said quietly. I died for a bit." My heart stopped. And I saw something. I felt peace, Ben. I felt love. And I heard a voice. It told me that life wasn't just about surviving. That there was something more. That we're all connected to something greater. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Ben's mind racing, trying to process what I had just said. He was quiet for so long that I thought he might have hung up. "Joe," he finally said, his voice low, "I don't know what to say. I mean, I've heard about these kinds of experiences, but I never thought it would happen to someone I know. Are you sure you're okay? I mean, really?" I sighed, feeling the weight of his concern. "I'm okay physically, but I don't feel the same. I've changed, Ben. In ways I can't even fully explain. I can't go back to the person I was before. I can't pretend that life is just about going through the motions anymore. I've seen something. Felt something. There was another pause. This time, it felt different, less about disbelief, and more about Ben trying to understand. I don't know if I believe what you're telling me, he said slowly. But I know you, Joe. And I can hear in your voice that you're not the same. I don't know what this means for you or for anyone else, but maybe you should explore it. Maybe this is something you're supposed to learn, or teach, or... I don't know. His words struck a chord in me. Maybe this is something you're supposed to teach. It was a simple idea, but one that had never occurred to me before. I had been so focused on my own confusion, my own struggles with this new reality, that I hadn't considered the possibility that my experience could help someone else. That perhaps the lessons I had learned, the truths I had been shown, weren't just for me. I'm not sure what to do with this, Ben, I said, my voice wavering. But I feel like I'm supposed to share it. Not in some preachy way, but, in a way that might help someone. Maybe I can't go back to my old life. But maybe that's because I'm meant to help others see what I've seen. There was a long pause before Ben spoke again. If you believe that, then maybe you should try, he said quietly. Maybe that's what you're supposed to do. Maybe that's why you came back. I didn't know what it all meant yet, but in that moment, something inside me clicked. I had spent so much time fighting this new reality, resisting the changes I had undergone, that I hadn't seen the obvious truth staring me in the face. The experience wasn't just for me. It wasn't just something I was supposed to hold on to. It was meant to be shared, to help others. To help them understand that life wasn't just about surviving, that there was meaning and purpose in every moment. Even in the pain, even in the loss, there was beauty. There was love. And maybe, just maybe, that was the lesson I had been sent back to teach. I had been back in the world of the living for months, and every day, the tension between the life I had known and the profound truths I had discovered during my near-death experience weighed on me. I couldn't escape it, nor did I want to. What I had seen, felt, and understood had fundamentally altered my perception of reality. But I wasn't sure how to bring others into this new understanding. How could I help people see what I had seen, feel what I had felt, when so many of them were still shackled by the limitations of their own lives? It wasn't until a late autumn evening, just as the sky was darkening and the world was settling into its evening quiet, that I found my first opportunity. I had been invited to speak at a local community center about my experience, and at first, I had hesitated. What could I say? How could I explain something so vast, so beyond the grasp of ordinary words, to people who might not even believe in life beyond death? But something inside me knew that I needed to try. I arrived at the community center early, a mixture of nervous energy and resolve coursing through me. The room was small, filled with folding chairs arranged in neat rows. A handful of people had already arrived, mostly older folks who had heard of my experience and wanted to know more. They greeted me warmly, but there was a sense of curiosity mixed with skepticism in their eyes. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I was beginning to realize that there was no way to truly prepare for this moment. I had no script, no clear direction, just my story and the truth that had been given to me. As I took my seat at the front, the chatter quieted, and the room settled into an expectant hush. I glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of a few familiar faces, neighbors, old acquaintances, and then, I began. I want to start by telling you something that may sound strange, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding in my chest. A few months ago, I died. I was on the operating table. My heart stopped. I was gone. But what happened after that, what I saw, what I felt, it's something I can't ignore. And it's not something I think you should ignore either. I paused, feeling the weight of their gaze upon me. Some looked at me with doubt, others with concern, but there was a group of people who listened with rapt attention. It felt like I had their attention, at least, and that was enough. When I died, I didn't just vanish. I didn't disappear into nothingness. I was shown something. I was shown that life, this life, it's not just about what we can touch or see. It's not just about surviving the day-to-day. There's more. There's a deeper connection. A connection to each other, to the universe, to something greater than ourselves. I paused again, trying to collect my thoughts. I wanted to make sure they understood, that I didn't sound like I was preaching or imposing my beliefs on them. I was just sharing my experience, the truth that had been shared with me. When I was on the other side, I continued, I felt peace. True peace. And I was told that death wasn't something to fear. It was a transition. But it wasn't the end. What matters is how we live, how we treat each other, how we love. The things we do, the way we live our lives, it all matters. Because it's all connected. The silence in the room felt thick. I could sense the collective skepticism, the uncertainty. But there was also a flicker of something else, something softer, something hopeful. An older man sitting in the back raised his hand, and I nodded for him to speak. I don't mean to interrupt, he said, his voice rough but kind, but I've got to ask, how do you know this? I mean, I've heard stories before. People who claim to have seen things. But how can you be so sure that what you're saying is true? I took a deep breath, preparing for the hardest question of all. I can't prove it to you, I said honestly. I can't show you a photograph or tell you the exact coordinates of the place I went. But what I felt, what I experienced, it's not something I can forget. It's not something I can shake off. And it's not something I think I was supposed to just keep for myself. I let that hang in the air for a moment, giving them time to absorb my words. I came back for a reason, I continued, and I believe that reason is to share what I know. Not just about life and death, but about the importance of living fully, of truly living, of embracing each moment, each person, each experience. Another woman spoke up, her voice trembling. But I'm scared, Joe. I've lived a long life, but I don't know if I'm ready for what comes next. What happens when we die? How can you be so sure there's more? Her vulnerability struck a chord with me. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty that so many people shared. It was something I had faced myself before my experience. And even now, with the knowledge I had gained, the fear of death still lingered. I understand that fear, I said gently. I felt it too. I was afraid, and I wasn't sure I wanted to leave my life behind. But I've learned that death isn't the end. It's not something to fear, even though it's natural to be afraid. But the key is this, you're not alone. No one is alone in this journey. We're all connected, and whatever happens next, it's part of something bigger. Something beautiful. There was a long silence in the room, and I could feel their doubt, but there was also a shift, something was changing. The air felt lighter, less heavy. And slowly, they began to speak. You know, one man said thoughtfully, I've always been afraid of death. But hearing you say that, it's comforting. I never thought of it that way. Another woman nodded. It makes sense. Maybe I've been living in fear, too focused on what comes after, and not enough on living well now. And then, unexpectedly, the elderly woman from earlier, the one who had spoken to me in the park, stood up. Her silver hair gleamed in the soft light, and her voice rang out clear and strong. I've lived a long life, she said, smiling at me, and I've learned that the most important thing is love. That's the truth I've always known. It's about how we love, how we treat one another. And when you've been shown that, when you've seen it for yourself, you can't ignore it. I blinked, stunned by her words. She was echoing everything I had learned, everything I had felt. And in that moment, I realized something profound. This wasn't just about my experience. It was about all of us, together. Each person had their own path, their own understanding, but when we came together, when we shared our truths, our experiences, we built a bridge between worlds. A bridge that connected us all, in ways we couldn't see, but could feel. And maybe that was the purpose of my return, to build that bridge. The days after the community center meeting were a blur. I had expected some level of skepticism or disbelief from the people I spoke to, but the weight of it still felt heavy. It wasn't the disbelief that bothered me, it was the way it made me feel isolated. It was as if I was speaking a language they couldn't understand, no matter how many times I tried to explain. It was harder than I imagined, sharing the truth I had learned on the other side. There were some people, like the woman in the park and the elderly gentleman at the meeting, who seemed to understand, who saw the same truth I had seen. But for most, it was still too foreign. Too strange. Too far removed from their lived reality. Rachel, too, was still trying to process everything. She wanted to understand, but I could see the concern in her eyes whenever I spoke about my experience. She had grown up in a world where the idea of life after death was more of a comforting thought than a concrete reality. For her, what I had gone through seemed too fantastical, too surreal to fit into the framework of what she believed. One evening, as we sat in our living room, Rachel finally voiced the thoughts that had been lingering between us for weeks. "Joe, I don't know how to say this, but I'm worried about you," she said quietly, her voice tinged with concern. I put down the book I had been reading and turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's just, this whole thing. The way you talk about it. I know you've had a life-changing experience, but it's like you're disconnected. Like you're not really here with me. With us." I felt the pang of guilt. The last thing I wanted was to alienate her, but in some ways, I understood what she meant. The world felt so different to me now. It was like I was standing in two places at once, one foot in the physical world, the other in the intangible space of the truth I had glimpsed. I was struggling to find a way to reconcile these two parts of me. But how could I make her see that? "I'm sorry, Rachel," I said, my voice heavy. "I don't mean to make you feel like I'm not here. It's just, everything has changed. The way I see the world, the way I understand life, it's all different now. And I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to make you understand what I've been through." She sighed, her gaze softening. "I don't want to sound like I'm dismissing what you've experienced. But it's hard, Joe. It's hard for me to see you like this. It's hard for me to understand what happened when you were on that table." I felt a lump form in my throat. I understood her frustration, her confusion. I didn't know how to make her understand, how to bridge that gap between us. I didn't know how to make her see what I had seen, feel what I had felt. "I don't expect you to understand," I said quietly. "But I need you to know that what I've learned, it's not just something I can forget. It's not something I can just go back to ignoring. I'm different, Rachel. I can't go back to the person I was before. I can't pretend that life is just about the daily grind, the things we accumulate, the things we achieve. There's something deeper than that." She reached out and took my hand. "I know you're different. And I want to understand, I do. But I need time. I need time to figure out what this means for us. For our life together." I nodded. I couldn't ask for more than that. It was going to take time, for both of us. This was a journey we were both on, though we were walking it on different paths. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. It was another sleepless night, and my mind was racing with all the thoughts and emotions I had been carrying. I was torn between the new reality I had discovered and the world I was still a part of. The truth I had been shown was so clear, so undeniable, and yet it felt like trying to speak in a foreign language to those who had never heard it before. I couldn't help but feel like a wanderer. Someone who had stepped outside of the boundaries of life as I had known it, but now didn't quite belong to either world. It was a lonely feeling, despite the love and support I had around me. The next day, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The weather was cool and crisp, and the trees had just begun to show signs of autumn's approach. I found myself back at the park, walking the familiar paths that had once been a part of my everyday life. The park had always been a place of refuge for me, a place where I could think, reflect, and reconnect with the simplicity of life. As I walked, I noticed something unusual. There was a man sitting alone on a bench by the pond, his hands resting in his lap, his eyes distant. There was a kind of quiet sadness about him, and something inside me urged me to approach. I sat down beside him, and for a moment, we simply sat in silence, watching the ducks glide across the water. After a while, he turned to me and smiled faintly. "I don't usually talk to strangers," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But you look like someone who understands what it feels like to be lost." I didn't know what to say at first. But something about his words resonated with me. "I'm not sure I understand," I said slowly. "But I've been feeling disconnected. Like I don't belong in the world I used to know anymore." The man nodded, as if he'd been expecting that answer. "I get that. You're not the first person to feel that way. After all, we all go through changes in life, sometimes without even realizing it. But some changes, they force us to see things differently." I was intrigued. "What do you mean?" The man paused, gazing out over the pond as if contemplating his own thoughts. "Some changes make us see the world in a new light. Maybe you've seen it. Maybe you've felt it. But the real challenge is in learning how to live with it. How to bridge the gap between what we know and what we've been shown." I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if he knew exactly what I had been going through, the same struggle I had been feeling, trying to reconcile what I had learned with the world I was still a part of. "You're not alone," he said, turning to face me. "None of us are. We all have our journeys. And sometimes, the hardest part is learning how to share what we've learned, how to teach others what we've seen." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle into my chest. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel quite so alone. The encounter with the man in the park stayed with me long after I left the bench. His words resonated deep within me, echoing the very struggles I had been facing. It was as though he had articulated the conflict I had been carrying inside me, how to bridge the gap between what I had learned, the profound truth I had glimpsed, and the world that continued on, unchanged. I found myself thinking about his words over and over again. "Learning how to share what we've learned," he'd said. Was that my purpose now? Was my near-death experience not just for my own enlightenment, but for others as well? And how could I, a man struggling to understand the enormity of it all, teach others something so vast, so intangible? When I got home that evening, Rachel could tell something was different. I didn't even have to speak before she noticed the change in my demeanor. "You're quiet tonight," she remarked, looking up from her knitting. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to even begin explaining. But then, I found myself sitting next to her, taking her hands in mine, and saying the one thing that had been weighing on me. "I think I understand now," I said, my voice soft but filled with a new certainty. "I think I know what I'm supposed to do. It's not just about me, Rachel. This experience, everything I've gone through, it's not just for me to keep. It's for others, too." Rachel looked at me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "The man I met at the park today, he said something that really struck me. He said we all go through changes in life, sometimes without even realizing it. And sometimes, those changes force us to see the world differently. But the real challenge is learning how to live with it. How to teach others what we've learned. And I think that's my purpose now." Rachel's eyes softened as she listened. "So you're going to share your experience with others?" "Yes," I replied, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. "But not in a way that's preachy or overbearing. I don't want to force this on anyone. But I want to be there for people who are searching for answers, for those who are dealing with their own fears of death, of life. I want to help them understand that life has meaning, that there's more to it than we can see. She squeezed my hand gently. I think that's beautiful, Joe. But you're still trying to figure out what that means for you, right? You're not going to rush into this. I smiled at her, grateful for her understanding. I'm not rushing. But I can't ignore it anymore. It's a part of who I am now. That night, after Rachel fell asleep, I sat in the quiet of our living room, reflecting on everything I had learned. The truth I had seen on the other side, about love, about connection, about the continuity of life, was something so profound that I knew I couldn't just keep it to myself. But at the same time, I knew there were many people who wouldn't understand, who might even reject it. How could I make them see? I found myself thinking of the community center meeting again. The room full of people, some of whom had believed and some who hadn't. And the one question that kept coming to mind was, how do I make them feel what I felt? It wasn't enough to speak words, to explain it all logically. I had to show them, somehow. But how? How could I take this experience and translate it into something tangible, something that would resonate with the hearts and minds of others? The next day, I called Ben. He was the one person who had listened without judgment, who hadn't been afraid to hear the truth. I knew I needed his advice, his perspective. Ben, I've been thinking, I said when he picked up. About what you said, that maybe I'm supposed to share what I learned. But I'm not sure how to go about it. I don't just want to talk about it, I want people to feel it. I want them to understand what I've seen. But how do you make people feel something they can't see or touch? Ben was quiet for a moment before responding. You can't force it, Joe. You can't make someone see it if they're not ready to. But you can live it. You can embody what you've learned. And sometimes, the best way to teach is to simply be an example. Let people see the peace, the love, the clarity in your life. When they see it in you, they'll start asking questions. And that's when you'll be able to share. His words struck me deeply. I had been focused on the idea of explaining, of teaching in a conventional way. But what if the real lesson was simply in how I lived? In how I carried myself, how I interacted with others? Could the truth I had learned shine through my actions rather than my words? I spent the following weeks reflecting on this new approach. I began to focus less on trying to convince people and more on simply living in alignment with the truth I had seen. I started spending more time with friends and family, engaging in meaningful conversations, and listening more deeply to those around me. I volunteered at the local shelter, helping those in need, and I took walks with Rachel, cherishing the simple moments of connection. And slowly, something incredible began to happen. People started noticing the change in me. The peace that I had experienced on the other side was beginning to radiate through me, not because I was trying to show it off, but because it was now a part of who I was. And as they saw it in me, they began to ask questions. They wanted to know how I had found such peace, such clarity. It wasn't long before I found myself speaking to small groups of people once again, not to convince them of anything, but simply to share my story in a way that reflected the quiet strength I had gained. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about being authentic, being present, and letting the truth shine through in a way that felt natural. I began to realize that sometimes, the best way to teach was simply to live the lesson. To show others what it meant to truly live, with love, with purpose, with an open heart. And in doing so, I found a new kind of peace, a peace that came not from knowing all the answers, but from simply being. As I walked through the park one afternoon, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the crispness of autumn in the air, I realized something important. I wasn't alone in this journey. I had people who supported me, who believed in me, and who saw the change in me. But more than that, I wasn't just living for myself anymore. I was living for something greater, for the love, the truth, and the connection that transcended all boundaries. And that was enough. It had been months since that conversation with Rachel, and as the seasons changed, so too did my perspective. I had learned to accept the tension between the old world I once inhabited and the new one I had discovered. I had started to find peace in living out my truth quietly, showing through my actions what I had come to understand. But I knew there was still something unresolved, something I had been avoiding. I had tried to ignore it for a while. I thought that if I simply lived differently, acted differently, perhaps it would go unnoticed. But the truth was, I still had not fully reconciled with myself, or with those closest to me, the experience of my death, my return, and the lessons that had come with it. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Rachel looked at me with an expression that I hadn't seen before. It was a mixture of curiosity, concern, and, maybe, something else I couldn't quite identify. "Joe," she began, her voice steady but filled with the weight of something unspoken, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've been through. And I know you've shared bits and pieces, but I think it's time we have a real conversation about it. About everything." I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I had known this moment was coming. I had avoided it, hoping that time would smooth things over, but deep down, I knew this conversation was inevitable. It was time to face the parts of myself that I had kept hidden. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't know how to explain them. "Rachel, I started, but she gently placed her hand on mine, urging me to continue. "No, let me talk," she said softly. "I think I've been holding back, too. I've been trying to process everything in my own way. But you've changed, Joe. And it's not just in how you act. It's in how you think, how you see the world. I can feel it, and honestly, sometimes I feel like I don't know who you are anymore." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I thought I had been doing a good job of adjusting, of sharing my experiences little by little. But the truth was, I hadn't fully opened up to her, not in the way she needed me to. "I didn't mean to make you feel like that," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's hard to explain. What I saw, what I felt, it's not like anything I can put into words. I've tried, but nothing I say seems to capture the depth of it. And I don't know how to make you understand what I went through, Rachel. It's not something I can explain in a few sentences. It's something I live with every day now." She nodded slowly, processing my words. "I get that. But I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything is normal, like you're the same person you were before. Because you're not, and I see that. But I love you, Joe. And I want to understand. I want to know who you are now. I want to know what's going on inside you." It was the opening I needed, the invitation to finally speak my truth, to lay it all out, not just for her, but for myself. I took a deep breath and began. "When I died on that table," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "I saw things that are beyond words. I felt a kind of peace that doesn't make sense by any earthly standard. I saw a truth, about love, about connection, about the eternal nature of life, that is so much bigger than anything we can imagine here. And when I came back, everything was different. But I didn't know how to tell anyone. How could I? It's so far beyond our daily lives, beyond the things we're told to focus on." Rachel listened quietly, her gaze fixed on me, but I could see the depth of emotion in her eyes. "I know this sounds crazy," I continued, "but it's the truth. I saw people I loved who had passed, and they were at peace. I saw a kind of love that transcends everything. And what I learned is that life, this life, is just a small part of something much bigger. I came back because I had more to do here. I had more to learn. But now, I can't ignore the truth of it. It's like I'm living in two worlds at once." Rachel was silent for a moment. Then, to my surprise, she stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the fading light of the evening. I held my breath, unsure of what she was thinking. After what felt like an eternity, she turned back to me. "Joe, I don't fully understand what you went through. I don't know if I ever will. But I can see the change in you. I can see that it's real. And if you say it's the truth, then, maybe it is. I don't have all the answers, and I won't pretend like I do. But what I do know is that I love you. And I want to find a way to walk this path with you, whatever that means. I stood up, my heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you, Rachel, I whispered. Thank you for hearing me. For accepting this. She smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. I don't know what this journey is going to look like, but I want to try. I want to be there with you, even if it means learning together. The weight I had carried for so long seemed to lift, if only a little. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Rachel didn't have all the answers, and neither did I, but we were willing to face this together. And in that moment, I realized something profound. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about walking the journey, no matter how uncertain it might seem. Later that night, as we lay in bed, Rachel turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Joe, she said softly, do you ever wonder if maybe the truth you saw on the other side is something we all have access to? Maybe we're just not looking for it the right way. I smiled at her, the spark of hope igniting in my chest. I think you're right, I said, squeezing her hand. Maybe we all have the potential to see it. Maybe it's just about being open to it. About remembering that there's more to this life than we can see. And as we drifted off to sleep, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. I had reconciled with Rachel, and more importantly, I had reconciled with myself. The journey ahead would still be uncertain, but I was no longer afraid. I was no longer burdened by the need to have all the answers. The only thing I needed to do now was continue walking, one step at a time. As the days turned into weeks, the steady rhythm of my new life began to take shape. The internal conflict I had lived with for so long, struggling to reconcile my near-death experience with the world I had returned to, began to fade. The anxiety, the fear of not being understood, slowly dissolved. I had learned to accept that not everyone would see the world the way I now did. But I also realized that didn't make my experience any less real, or any less valuable. One evening, I found myself sitting in the park again, the same bench where I had met the stranger months ago. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted with the soft hues of sunset. I closed my eyes, taking in the stillness of the moment, allowing the peace I had found within to wash over me once more. I didn't need to chase after answers anymore. The truth was not something I had to seek, it was something I had discovered within myself. It was then that I felt a familiar presence beside me. I opened my eyes, half expecting to see the stranger again. But instead, it was Rachel, her face soft with a kind of understanding that only time could cultivate. She sat down beside me, her hand reaching for mine. "You've been quiet lately," she said gently, her voice filled with warmth. "Are you okay?" I looked at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her unwavering support. "I'm more than okay, Rachel," I replied, my voice steady. "I think I've finally found peace. I don't need to search for the answers anymore. I don't need to force them on anyone else. The truth I found, it's a part of me now. And that's enough." Rachel smiled softly, squeezing my hand. "I'm glad, Joe. I'm really glad." For a moment, we simply sat in silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples. The world seemed to slow, and I felt at home in it, finally. The chaos and confusion that had once defined my life had given way to something much simpler. The understanding that life, in all its mystery, was a gift. And that death, though feared by so many, was not an end, but a continuation, a transition to something greater. I leaned back on the bench, closing my eyes once more, and let the cool evening air fill my lungs. In that moment, I could almost hear the whispers of those I had loved who had passed, my parents, my friends, those who had shown me the way before me. They were still here, in some form, watching over me, guiding me. And I realized that what I had learned in those fleeting moments between life and death wasn't just about what awaited us on the other side. It was about how we lived our lives here, how we treated one another, how we loved and cared for the people who walked alongside us on this journey. I looked over at Rachel, her face bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. She had been my anchor, the one who had grounded me when I felt adrift. Together, we had come so far. You know, I said softly, my voice filled with a quiet reverence, I think everything I went through, the death, the return, the lessons, it was all about one thing. Love. That's the truth I was shown. Love is everything. It's the force that connects us all, the reason we're here, and the reason we continue after death. The world doesn't always make sense, and there's so much we don't understand. But if we just remember to love, if we just remember that we're all connected in some way, then everything else falls into place. Rachel nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with emotion. I think you're right, she whispered. I think love is the answer. And you've shown me that, Joe. In ways I never could have imagined. I smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. I had feared for so long that I would never be able to explain what I had experienced. I had worried that I would be misunderstood, or that the people I loved would not be able to see what I saw. But now, sitting here with Rachel, I realized that none of that mattered. The truth didn't need to be explained in perfect words. It was already alive in the way we treated one another, in the way we chose to live with kindness, compassion, and understanding. And then, as if to confirm everything I had come to believe, I felt a shift, a subtle, yet undeniable feeling. It was as if something, or someone, was present with us at that moment. A feeling of peace, of belonging, wrapped around us like a soft embrace. I looked up at the sky, the stars just beginning to appear in the darkening heavens. The same stars I had gazed at during my near-death experience. The same stars that had reminded me of something greater than myself. And in that moment, I understood. The truth I had seen was not meant to be kept, but shared. Not through words, but through actions. Through the way we lived our lives, through the love we gave, and through the compassion we showed to others. I squeezed Rachel's hand, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had brought me to this point. I had died. And I had come back. But what mattered most was that I was living now, not just for myself, but for something greater. I'm ready, I said quietly, the words flowing from me without hesitation. I'm ready to live fully. And I'm ready to share what I've learned, not in words, but through the way I live. Rachel turned to me, her eyes shining with a quiet understanding. I know, Joe. I know. And I'll be here, with you, every step of the way. As we sat there in the silence of the park, the truth of it all settled deep within me. I didn't need to know everything. I didn't need to fear death anymore. I had lived. I had died. And in the end, I had found something far greater than any answer or explanation. I had found love. And that was enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?